I would don't even know where to start. I normally am not at a loss for questions, but one of the first things beyond architecture and real estate and all the things that we're going to talk about, um, I'd just like to know, given the sort of state of the world with COVID and how that's affecting everyone, no matter where they are and what they do. I just really more wanted to check in and ask about you, your family, community, how everybody is doing in your world.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that. We're doing okay. I mean, we don't have, luckily, it's pretty bad in Southern California. I think people don't realize that don't live here. The idea is that everyone's living very suburban and far apart, but Los Angeles is a very dense city, and there's a lot of people, housing is a huge problem here. So a lot of people are living very close together. It's been, it's been tough. We're super fortunate because we've been able to keep working from home. We're still working from home, hoping to go back soon. It's a little hard, the collaboration side of work. It's really hard to keep that up, but I'm just thankful we have stuff we can do and that we've been able to make a living. So many people can't. So it's great that way. Yeah, I don't know. Hopefully soon. A lot of people are getting vaccinated, and hopefully that'll speed up more. I'm very optimistic it's going to speed up faster and faster. And hopefully in a few months it'll be in the rearview mirror.
I agree with you and hope for exactly the same. What an amazing thing, just to it knows no boundaries. It has any way you slice it, in any way, shape, or form, it has had effect on us.
And everybody. Yeah. How's your family?
Everybody.
Are you guys okay?
Thank you. We are. Montreal or Quebec as a province has one of the highest rates of per capita, certainly in Canada. We're currently in a lockdown. We even have actually a government imposed curfew that's currently on here from 8 p.m. until 5 a.m. unless you're essential or you're walking a dog within 1 kilometer. I know, given that you're from Ireland, I can speak in metric, and 1 kilometer is okay. For our US friends, 0.6 of a mile. Without, really those being the limiting factors, we are supposed to be sort of in the house, and we've seen our numbers drop in half in a few weeks. Yeah. So it's working, but it's been a ride.
Yeah,
it's been a real ride.
Yeah, it's very worrying as well, just from the mental health perspective for a lot of people, I think. And that's, obviously we need to take it super seriously. I've had, there's people, we've seen a lot of shutdowns in our job sites. Construction in California is considered essential, so it hasn't really shut down, but there have been a lot of people very sick, and some people that have unfortunately passed away, that, subcontractors and contractors that we know and consultants, and it's hard, but I also think it's affecting in so many other levels as well, yes. And the strains it's putting on relationships and everything. So God, I hope it's in the rearview mirror soon,
As do I. Well, to turn to maybe a more positive subject and thinking forward. I guess so many overlaps. I don't know if you even know that Urban Bonfire is actually included as one of the features in one of your projects that I want to talk about in a few minutes. But I guess if you look at your work, the sheer size and scale of what you do in so many of your projects, I don't know of an architect and design or architecture firm that has as many Instagram followers as a Kardashian, for example. And you have obviously gone from, and they may be a client of yours, but you have taken something that is a skill, an education, obviously a passion, and you've put it on a pedestal of scale that is almost euphoric in its definition. It is at the scale of the Disneyland, these sort of things that only, I remember, I'll give you a bit of context. Many years ago, in I think 2000, the early 1992 or 3, I happened to have been visiting Israel. And I went to a movie. I went to a movie theater there. And if you remember the film The Bodyguard with Kevin Costner and Whitney Houston, and the shot onto this mansion with the pools and the audience, because that was something at that point, the scale of that in Israel was almost unheard of. And people just went, whoa, because of the sheer nature of what was possible. And that, by today's standards, by the types of projects you work on, would seem almost humble. How does somebody go from starting as an architect to the type of scale of project that you have the pleasure and the privilege of working on? Help me understand a bit of your story and a bit of your journey to what you do now.
Well, it's obviously it was a journey, and it doesn't happen overnight. And it's funny, we do tend to get a little bit pigeonholed on these really huge homes, but we do homes of all scales, and that's always been my passion. I mean, ever since I was a little boy, I wanted to be an architect, but I really only wanted to do houses. I've never really had much interest in doing other types of architecture. So for me, it's always been homes. And I've firm, we're 20 years old now. And over those 20 years, and we started doing, first project was a house that was about 1,800 square feet. I was really lucky. That first project was, I met a couple, they had a lot, they had some plans to do a house on it for kind of a Mediterranean home. But as they talked about it, they were just talking about a really contemporary, open design. And at the end of the conversation, I said, look, they really wanted me to just take these drawings and develop them. And I said, I don't think it makes sense based on what you're saying. And I think you should start over or buy a different house. And that was like around September 99. And on New Year's Day, her name is Patty, she called me back and she said, it's a new millennium and I want to do something brand new and we want you to design a house. And at the time, my wife and I were thinking of potentially going back to Europe. And we said, wow, I was 30 and it was, to get that opportunity so early in your architecture career seemed like we should definitely stay and do that. So I stayed and obviously I'm still here. And, it just started over time, the houses started to grow and we just kind of, as we learned from that house, 1,800 square foot, then the next house was a little bigger, sometimes they were smaller. At the beginning, was a lot of even remodels, a lot of historic houses, just anything to bring food on the table, just to get the business going. But there was, I think sometimes when you look back, you can see some inflection points. And one definitely was when we did the house on Blue Jay Way that Avicii ended up buying, and we ended up remodeling it again with him. But I started that house in 2005 and it was completed in 2008. And the person that we designed it for couldn't afford it anymore because of the crisis in the economy. But it still sold for a lot of money at the time. And it's funny now, those numbers, don't seem as crazy as compared to what's happened in the last 10 years. But yeah. Sold for a lot of money, and unfortunately or fortunately, that's how it often works, is when people see something that is very successful in that sense, then the phone starts ringing. And we found ourselves in this kind of strange situation that during the big recession, we were designing speculative, which seemed like it's very strange. But by the time the recession was over, the people who were smart enough, I guess, to think about that, they had homes that were finished and that they could sell. And then of course there was not much competition out there. So everyone, people paid a lot of money and there was premiums, they were the highest selling per square foot in the neighborhood. And of course that gets you a lot of attention. And, everyone's a great architect when your houses are selling for a huge number. If they don't sell, then they think you're a lousy architect. So that's just reality. So that just led us on a path. And the great thing about doing speculative homes at the time is, they happen pretty quick. We design them quick, we build them quick. Our passion is with homeowners to do homes for families or individuals. We're lucky now that most of our work is in that direction, but we'll always be grateful for those homes, the speculative homes, and the people who helped us do them, because they gave us a portfolio relatively quickly of projects that then instill confidence in people that would allow us to do what we really wanted to do.
Mm-hmm. And when you say it's an interesting thing, or it's an important thing, you talk about the the ideal project at this moment is where you can really create with the family, create that sense of it's not house, it's not walls and floor and ceiling, it's home, and the emotional connection that creates. That obviously has a tremendous amount of reward and also a lot of challenge, because those can be extremely subjective feelings in different people that are often hard to articulate. You must be part sociologist, part psychologist, part anthropologist.
I
How
think
do you
so.
weave all of those disciplines together and create a harmony and a common vision with most likely very different stakeholders, often even if from the same family?
Well, I think it's one thing. I mean, if people are thinking about a career in architecture, if you want to do residential architecture like we do, you really do have to enjoy people. I mean, some people like people and other people would rather not have too much contact with people. And you have to learn to be flexible. I tell our clients right at the beginning that all information is good. Like, telling me that you love it is great. Telling me that you hate it is just as good, because that's going to help us get to that place that we need to be. We're lucky too, because we have obviously a lot of homes to work on, that if we have a great idea that we really feel passionate about, like, we'll argue our corner. But if the client just doesn't like it or doesn't feel it's appropriate, we can set that aside. And we always know if we really like it, maybe another house will come along that we can apply that idea to. So we try not to get very hurt or very over attached to things that maybe don't match our clients. It's really client driven for us. And I think that's, the hardest part is when you have, like, for example, a couple that, have diametrically opposite views of what it should be, and trying to navigate that so that both people feel like they're getting the attention they deserve and their ideas are being validated. So that's where the therapy part comes in. But we've learned over the years, how to handle that. And I think, we try and pull out of what everyone says the positive. For example, right now, we're working on a house in Florida, and the other day the client called me and they said, well, we're really happy about the way the floor plan's going, but really don't like the way the house looks. And my response to them was like, well, great, we've made great progress, because we have a floor plan that you're comfortable with. Now we can see how can we adjust the way that feels and looks to make you happy on that side. So I don't really spend a lot of time trying to pre-design the house or to have an overarching vision. I feel like it comes organically from the program. So until that settles, I mean, we spend a lot of time looking at the site and trying to figure out what's important, what we need to edit out, like almost like in a movie, like we're screen editing. So maybe there's a noisy street down below, and we might push out a pool or a water feature so that people cannot walk out and see the noisy street, and then use the water to help mitigate the sound. So that, like, we call that spatial editing. And maybe there's a neighboring house that we need to screen with vegetation, or maybe we have to focus the house in a way to a view. So that takes a lot of our time, and then trying to mesh that with the program. So I spend my time thinking about that, not thinking about the house. And then usually the house just kind of emerges from that. And then there's a phase of just trying to make it look pretty.
Well, yeah, and I think it's interesting, because one of the things that I frequently talk about in presentations, whether it's with potential dealers or potential partners, things of this type, is this worldwide movement towards urbanity. And I often quote the statistic that within 100 years, from 1950 to 2050, the proportion of people living in urban versus rural settings will have inverted itself. And my hypothesis, and more as a question to you, is my hypothesis is that when people move from living in 5,000 or 6,000 square feet on 4 acres to your point, 1,800 square feet with a deck that's 30 by 40, for example, the inherent role and responsibility of the architect design professional becomes far greater, because you're dealing with far smaller amounts of space,
Right.
Which still needs to be maximized experientially. How do you feel about that? Is that, as someone who's worked in, as you say, 1,800 square foot to, I don't remember the square footage of the one, but, and we'll talk about that, but
yeah,
you're talking about something that is, just an unbelievable scale. How do you find the inspiration to play in both of those arenas?
Well, they're both puzzles in a way, right? In different ends. I mean, I would say, for us, like our average home is probably between 7 and 10,000 square feet. But I would say that they're more like 6 to 7,000 square feet above ground. There's often basements for different reasons. So, we're thinking about a home along that size. So those two are the extremities. But I do often feel like that our homes are not particularly baroque. They're not particularly full of things. They're relatively spare. Someone once said, like, it's interesting that you can get people who are have so much money to live in such simple surroundings, in a way. But we're really all about light and air, transparency, views to nature. I think those things are common across everything. In many ways, the smaller house is a more interesting challenge because those are the realities of what for more people, of how they're going to live. And I think that on top of that, then you're dealing with more confined situation where you're trying to bring that same feeling. And it's never more important as people urbanize more. And I do feel that space it's like the ultimate luxury in this world. To have space around you and to have space to be able to retreat and find quiet time, not hear noise, get away from your screen. So these are the things that people are going to start to realize are true luxury. I mean, everyone can have an iPhone kind of these days, and
Yes.
Consumer products are everywhere and they're cheap relatively, but to be able to find peace and quiet and that moment of zen in the day, or a place where you feel comfortable, that's harder for people. And I think COVID has really brought that to the fore. And I hope going forward that we're all a bit more aware, in terms of even urban planning, the importance of access to the exterior, importance of light. These things can get played down, when we always seem to design in the public sphere to minimum requirements for height. And, I'd love to see, out of this, a movement towards expanding. For example, I think that building code is like, it's 8 feet or 2.4 meters is the typical height of a room. I mean, I'd love to see cities requiring 3 meters, for rooms, because developers building apartments are always going to try and keep their costs down, as best they can. And
Sure.
these are going to stick around for hundreds of years potentially, and people are always going to be stuck. So that's something that's really, on my mind. So I think even if you have a small piece of land or a small program, you have to find ways and look for ways to have what you just mentioned, Ryan, that feeling of expanse. And you can do it even if you don't have to have a beautiful city view. You can create a focal point at the end of a small garden and just open each room and turn to it. You can add skylights to pick up the sky during the day so you feel the movement of the day. And all these things can be applied even in very small projects, and to give people a sense of well-being and happiness. And obviously, in every is massively important. And being, I grew up in a very modest public housing home in Dublin, but one of the nice things about it was that it had a really big window in the front garden, and I used to play there when I was a little boy, and just in front, because the sun's not out much in Ireland, and playing there in the sun inside, and it was a window that pretty much filled up the whole wall of the room, and it was the best thing in the house. So, that was a tiny house. So all these things can be applied at any scale. At the other end, working on really large homes, we really have to think of them differently. They don't act or feel particularly like homes. We try and create spaces within them that give people that sense of more intimacy, but they really work like small hotels or resort spaces, and we kind of think of them that way.
Sure. Well, it's interesting. I want to come back to something you mentioned, which was the notion of the term space. And my opinion, or my hypothesis, or gut, however you want to define it, is that for a really long time, the term space within the architecture, design, even the consumer community had this preconceived notion that it was interior. And when you were talking about the exterior, it was the outdoor space, or it was the outdoors.
Yeah.
It was a different definition and context. And I am seeing, and I think that this has been a factor or a trend for some time. And to your point a moment ago, I do believe that COVID has been an accelerant in this factor, because the outdoor still, even in incredible homes where massive investment has been made on design, architecture, and indoor, in so many cases, there is still this tremendous disconnect, and the outdoors is now catching up. Are you, in your practice, in terms of consumer request, or you from an ideology perspective, do you see a different definition today of outdoor space, how it integrates, its importance, whether that was a specific moment in time where you said, shit, I got to put more focus on this, or has it always been part of your core belief system?
For me, it's always been part of the core belief system, but I do absolutely agree with you, Ryan, that there's been a movement into thinking of that. And I see that at every level, you know, that when I was growing up, you know, gardens, especially, you know, the back garden was kind of just this afterthought. And even in very small or humble homes, when I go back to Ireland and see them there, garden is part of the living space now. You know, people have, they've been building out there, putting in fire pits, they've been putting out there, even if they've only got 100 square feet, you know, or less, they're making it part of their home. And I think that's fantastic.
I'm trying to envision, and I'm taking myself back to one of my favorite movies of all time called The Commitments. I'm sure you know the film by Alan Parker, which was set in Dublin, I believe. And I'm trying to put myself in the vernacular of what you're describing. I don't want to interrupt you, please.
No, and it is, you know, that particular place, Darndale, where they set that, was just down the road from where I grew up, and it has a bit of a checkered history. You know, you can kind of see the architects at the time, as I look back at it now, that what they were trying to achieve makes sense then, but it just did not work out. You know, it's interesting too. I mean, it's something they were trying to create, like a dense urban small environment, you know, in the outskirts of the city, but generally people don't move to the outskirts of the city for a dense urban environment. And you know, I think also public housing can be difficult that way, because it cut down on the private ownership part, you know, so they're trying to create community spaces, but as often happens in those type of projects, the money is never considered for maintaining the public spaces. You know, that like everyone has brilliant ideas and they design potentially beautiful things, but then nobody puts any money into maintenance going forward or considers that as part of the life cycle. And then these spaces become barren and deserted, and people then don't take part of them. And one of the more interesting things, even in that particular estate of homes, is that when the government started to privatize it, they started to claw back the public space and then give it to people as part of their, you know, their ownership, and that helped improve it. So slightly off topic, you know, but
no, but an important one, because I think it's interesting, and I'll just give you an idea or a window into where I was going with this. I remember maybe about 2 years ago, I was in Toronto, our big neighboring city. My son was there for a hockey tournament, and I was walking to where it was in the middle of downtown at this beautiful school, and I see this development, this forthcoming luxury, la creme de la creme type of condo project going up. And I remember taking notice that these huge renderings that were really trying to promote the vision of the project, 3 out of the 6 renderings were about outdoor space. And we're in Canada, where it's frozen 6 months of the year. And it really had me thinking about it. And then seeing the project delivered a couple years later, and just to go back and see it, and what tremendous disconnect there was from the vision or the illusion of the outdoor to what was actually delivered. And I think, to your point, a lot of that comes down to, you know, developers often get very penny wise and dollar foolish on the implementation of common area aspects like outdoors. And yet it's one of the huge drivers and one of the big difference makers experientially of living in one of these places.
Exactly. Yeah, it's I think, and I mean, maybe we definitely see homeowner side an awareness that's been developed through COVID, which is hard to stay away from as a topic. But you know, there's definitely, I think people are coming to us now and they're thinking more critically about space and how it might be used. And you just have to hope that that's going to translate into the public sphere as well. And I do have, you know, some friends and coworkers who are a lot younger than me who are looking for rental housing, for example. And this is top of their mind, is like outdoor space, you know, communal space, you know, gyms, swimming pools here, obviously, because the weather is a little warmer. But, you know, that how, you know, what's the right size, you know, where will there be a sense of community? These are the things that people are looking for. And, you know, I think successful development is going to have to take, and people are going to be more critical, I think, after going through this experience. So hopefully it will spur people on to think a bit more creative. And I think, you know, part of that falls back on the public sphere because, you know, developers, let's not fool ourselves. You know, developers are, they want to have successful projects, but they want to make money first and foremost, and they want to get out as quick as they can. And who can blame them? That's their business model, right? So it's up to the community, you know, to push back against that and set the boundaries. And I think, for having had a lot of experience with developers, you know, the biggest issue is always getting concrete answers. I mean, you know, not being subjective. So, you know, I don't think you're going to find that just because you mandate that ceiling heights have to be higher or that a certain amount of money has to be put aside for public maintenance. It's not going to stop people building. They're just going to happy to know those, as long as they know those parameters up front. If it makes sense, they'll do it. You know, but what really bothers them is when the parameters keep changing. You know.
I want to now, if I can, shift from the idea of high density developer living on one end of the extreme spatially to the one. And are we okay to talk about it? Is that
we talk about it a
okay?
little bit. It's not my biggest subject, you know. It's I think because it's so out there, you know, from the rest of what we do. But we can have a little chat about it.
Well, only because I got to tour it. I was in Los Angeles, let's see, about October 2019 for the West Edge Design Fair where we exhibited. And we got to do a site tour, of course, and couldn't take any pictures. And you know what, let's not even focus on this project, but let's focus on this style of home where you say, you know, average project, you just said, is about 10,000 square feet, which to the average person, 5 times the size of my personal home. Now, I live in Montreal, very traditional architecture, more density in most neighborhoods, stylistically, like you described from Ireland, very, you know, that's just stylistically. But the idea of 10,000 square feet to me is, you know, I wouldn't even know what to do with it. And I think there are some people who just build because they can build that much, and why not maximize every inch on their lot? When you're talking about that scale of home, that still is for a family of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, for example. How do you not treat it, in your words, like a hotel or a resort, which it can become very easy when you have 3 kitchens and 14 bedrooms and bowling alleys, and it is a very resort-like feel. But even at 10,000 square feet, at that level of scale, how do you create the home feeling of intimacy and that sort of hug that the average person is looking for in that amount of space?
I think, first of all, it sounds like it is a lot of space. Don't get me wrong on that. But some of that, and the pattern of development that we tend to be involved in tends to generate more space for several reasons. But I think part of the problem on part of the reason that these homes tend to get as large as they do where we are is because the land value is so high. And, you know, if you're going to build a home and it's going to cost a lot of money to build it, and California is a very expensive place to build, people tend to think everyone's thinking, you know, in the long term, like, what if something happens? What if I don't want to stay there? It doesn't matter what the budget is. Everyone's aware that things can change. And if you build a bigger house, you can probably, it's almost like an insurance policy that if you have to sell it, you'll probably get your money back.
Okay.
like I can give you like just in a big round kind of number way, but if you buy a lot for like $1 million, and if you have to build a 5,000 square foot house, and that's you know, $1,000 a foot, that's $6 million. You know, well, you know, houses might sell for like $1,000 a foot or $1,200 a foot, so you know, you get your basically money back, right? Maybe, but it's a bit, you know, on the fence. If you same $1 million lot, if you build, you know, 10,000 square feet, and there's a, you know, a disc, like it could be that you might generate a potential profit of $2 or $3 million, you know, then everyone feels more sure of their investment. So some of that is to do with what the size is. There's always that component. But, you know, you'd be amazed how quickly people, when we start to program out houses, you know, everyone wants a smaller house until we start to list all the spaces they want. And some of the space is just more generous, like space within the volume, like a bigger living room with higher ceilings and so on. And so maybe instead of it being 400 square feet or, you know, 40 meters squared, it's like 800, you know, but it's just making a better, bigger space. So some of the space gets used up. Our houses don't necessarily at that scale have 14 bedrooms. They may only have 4, but they have larger rooms, larger bathrooms, larger closets. But another thing that we try and do is just identify, if it is only a couple of people, they'll probably be living on one floor, you know, and then the rest is for maybe adult children who come to visit, or teenagers, and they may go down below, and then they may have their own living space down there. And so it kind of tends to, the perfect example I had once was a client wanted to build a 60,000 square foot house, which is actually huge, because she ended on an enormous, but she wanted to feel intimate because just her and her husband, you know? And what we did there is we created a central core. So the master bedroom had its own stair, which came directly down behind the kitchen family room. And they basically would live just in the master bedroom, kitchen family room area. And then the rest of the house just kind of flew out in different directions for there and could open up. And when they did do these, they would entertain 300-400 people at a time.
Wow.
They would, you know, then the whole house would be used, but they could have this more intimate, scaled space that was probably about 2,000 square feet. That was the center of their living experience, you know. So you can play with ideas like that to try and make these houses work better for people. But a lot of it is just, you know, open, big spaces, taking advantage of the view and the light and the fact that we can do that, and then we're not in a dense urban environment.
And that's where, and I completely agree with your assessment on it. What hits me with that subject is the historically, and I'm sure there are cases that fall outside of this. You can spend a lot of money on anything, but you know, to activate outdoor space is typically significantly less costly per square foot than indoor space. So to me, it's almost like you can, if you have the available land, you can sacrifice some of the indoor square footage, actually come out economically ahead, but experientially equal to or greater than, because it is, I've always used the term, not always, in the last few months, it's sort of dawned on me that when you plan home, or at least to the layperson, for the scale that you're doing it at, but I know these types of things. But when I'm planning my outdoors, I've got a lot more of a whiteboard, because I believe the outdoors becomes a bit of an executive summary for people's style of living.
Yeah,
they can pick and choose the experience, whether that's cooking, whether that's gardening, whether that's health and wellness, whether that's spa. They can really morph that in very non-linear ways. And I think that's one of the beauties of the outdoors.
Yeah, it is. We're starting a project.
Do you feel that in your?
Absolutely, yeah. We're starting a project in Denver right now, and it's in a nice, you know, inner suburb location. But the lot is relatively large for that neighborhood. I would say most lots in that neighborhood would be 5,000 square feet, 500 square meters, and this one is double. But the house we're designing isn't any bigger than the rest of its neighbors. And so the idea is that how to work with the outdoor space is going to be just as critical as the indoor space. And that's been a big driver for the client, that they want to be able to make the most of the seasons that they have there, which are relatively short and changeable, but just the different environments and different experiences outdoors that they can have. And we will need to keep that kind of inner suburb density, we'll have to use elements like exterior walls and covered cabanas type spaces and so on to create that sense of urbanity on the lot as well that they need. So absolutely. But I think not talking real estate too much, but we do tend to, when we talk to clients, we always try and help them understand what makes sense from a real perspective without spending, like, it is their dream home and we want it to be their dream home specific to them, because I do truly believe if you build a beautiful home, there has to be an emotional connection to that. If someone is going to sell it, they're going to buy it based on how they feel about it. And every home is never perfect for the next person. It's always missing something. So we don't want to spend our time trying to figure who the next person is. We're trying to figure out who this person is and make it work for them. So, we would discourage someone from, designing a house with no bedrooms except for, the one master bedroom. But, if they like, should we have 4 or 5 bedrooms? I'd be like, well, works for you. 3 or 4 or 5. And then I'm sure if you ever have that problem and you need to sell it, someone else will be happy with it. So I think creating that emotional connection to the property and the land and the house is more important necessarily than being a slave to the market.
Yeah, well, I mean, that always, it to me comes back the same way as at a definition level. When you set up or you start a company, there is an inherent difference in feeling, I think, from the entrepreneur or whoever builds it, when it is being built just to flip. I'm building this to sell versus I'm building a legacy project that I have. If I ever sell it, great, but that's not my intention. My intention is to build something that is a legacy that I will, hopefully, God willing, pass on to my children. And I think there's a fundamental difference. One is very tactical and one is very emotional in many ways.
Almost romantic,
Yeah, I mean, I never started Urban Bonfire with the intention of, what does it mean to sell it or let's build it. It was never part of my thinking. It was, how do I share this feeling or this experience from sitting around a bonfire pit, in a house that my parents bought when I was 6 years old for $28,000 that is still on stumps with no foundation even today, 41 years later. But the greatest joy of my life. And how do I impart that through what we do in our designs to other people? In its essence, that's it.
That's brilliant.
It's never about anything else.
Yeah, I think so. Same for me. I mean, I never set out with a strategy in mind, to develop the business, or it wasn't about being a business. It was about creating architecture, and it still is. And I mean, it's just great. I still feel like I want to pinch myself to, I get to do something I really like. People pay me for it, which is really amazing. Like, I mean, I'd probably still be doing it if they didn't pay me. So,
but isn't that the greatest thing someone could say, that even if I wasn't being paid for it, I would still do it? I mean, who could ask for a more authentic experience?
Yeah, and I try and instill that to my kids and other young people I meet, that just trying to find something that you've got some passion about. Don't worry about what's going to make the most money, because really, if you're so unhappy at it, you're going to have a miserable life, even if you have a little bit more money. Better to find something and your passion, and hopefully if you're good at something, it usually leads to good results. That way works out.
It usually does. If you make good choices and working towards something, even if you don't know what it is yet, but working in the right way, it usually leads you on the right path.
Absolutely.
We've talked a lot about, from an architecture, from your design perspective, your experience and the value. And I want to come back. The last question I want to ask you or talk about on outdoors. Obviously, your project, your scope, your vision is incredibly progressive and future thinking in terms of the realm of possible. Over the last, whether it's 5 or 6 or 10 years, have you seen a different psychology from the consumer, from your clients on outdoor space before you even have to bring it to them? Are you seeing a dynamic shift in people's appreciation for, willingness to invest in, the prioritization of outdoor spaces. And I acknowledge California with its weather far easier, but if you use Denver as an example, far more seasonality, or other markets that you work in.
Yeah.
Are you seeing a shift in psychology of your client base?
Very, very much. I would say that if we step back 10 years, we always ask people we work with to put together a lookbook of some kind, or Pinterest, or whatever it is today, Instagram. But back then it was mainly magazines. But the focus back then was always on interior spaces. And I would say when we get that lookbook from people today, at least 50% of it is exterior space. And I think people are really just thinking about living outdoors. And, you know, I feel like there's even a lot of climate. What's been most surprising to me as we start to work in different climates, because we have a couple of projects in Canada right now. We've one in Whistler and one outside Vancouver in Fort Langley. But and we're also working, for example, in Thailand and in England. And the things that people are most attracted, the reason they kind of come across the world to talk to us, is that idea of indoor outdoor living that developed, I think really developed in California in the last century. I mean, it is that's what attracted me here. It is the home of residential design, you know, experimental residential design for the last 100 years. And, you know, a combination of factors, you know, being a new city with a kind of suburban kind of approach, gave people room to do things, a varied topography, people with the financial resources, and then of course the big one, the weather. You know, those things all were what got that going here. But people are very attracted to that model, and we're finding when we do it in other places that, you know, even if we for example don't open up the spaces directly so much to the exterior, perhaps because the climate doesn't allow us to do it so often, we still find that people are very attracted to the idea of this indoor-outdoor connection. That's the basis of all our work. And, you know, even if I've had the experience of being in one of our homes in Germany in February with 2 feet of snow on the ground and sitting in the kitchen with, like, you know, 5-meter high glass that runs for like 10 meters and just watching the hawks, you know, diving through the snow to find food. And, you know, I'm like, this works. It works everywhere. And those moments where in these more, you know, temperate climates where you can actually be outdoors become actually more special, I think. And there's the certain days where it's just perfect. You know, we have to, you know, it's interesting, like in Vancouver, we have a lot of outdoor space in the project we're working on, but it's covered because of the amount of moisture. But, you know, down here in California, for people like me who come from cold places, I need the cover just as much, you know, so it's not that different at the end of the day. And, you know, both of them we install heaters, a lot of fireplaces outside, and they work equally well in both places, just maybe shorter in one, longer season in the other, you know.
Well, you've named the two actual markets where we have had the greatest success, California and British Columbia. If you were to isolate province or state where, for stylistic reason, you know, value of real estate, the prioritization of outdoor, they are really our two out of our 3 top markets in North America. So I think it very much follows suit with the psychology of that type of homeowner, or what they're looking for.
I have to say, I used to, before COVID, I was up in Canada 6 times a year, and I really miss it because it's like British Columbia is one of my favorite places, and I always look forward to stepping off the plane, you know, in Vancouver, and it's kind of, that's one thing I'm really looking forward to the end of COVID, that we at least get back to Canada.
Well, speaking of Canada and your origin or your roots in Europe, have you been to Montreal?
No, and I have 2 clients from Montreal, and I was supposed to go this year, well, you know, 2020, and I am dying to go to Montreal, and I would love to come visit you when I get there. It's one of a spectacular place, I think.
It is, and it is a magical place, and I'm obviously biased because I live here. but I think you will see, and if you come, it would be my great honor to give you a bit of a tour. Old Montreal was at one point a walled fortress city when it was run by France, and still
Yeah.
has, buildings to the 1700s, cobblestone. You can still see the old. My former office was in the horse stables of the governor of New France at the time. That's
Yeah.
how old these structures are. And then 5 or 6 minute drive, and you are in absolute, completely modern, technologically driven architecture and everything in between. So it would be such an honor to give you a walking tour if,
Yeah, I would
your
love to
travels
see
make you
it.
up here.
Yeah, I was just, we often talk about that, but I think people have around the world, especially Europeans, have the impression that everything in America, North America, is new. And but the reality is that places like Montreal are as old as most European cities are. There's not much that survives from pre-1600 in Europe anyway. And so you're walking around Montreal or Philadelphia, and it doesn't feel that different to Dublin or Frankfurt, or actually Frankfurt's worse because there's not that much left after the war. But you know what I mean? It's like really
Of
interesting.
course. It is still very, very dense and European in its scale. And even here, people, with tremendous financial means, in many cases, will choose smaller, more dense living in
Right.
favor of experience near the farmers market, near the
Right.
canal, near the
Right.
rather than bigger and more removed.
And being
Very interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
In many cases. Yeah.
That's something that,
Wow.
going back to our earlier conversation, that people, as this planet completely urbanizes, I mean, the trick is going to be how can we create more of that feeling versus, the kind of monotonous high-rise development that one often sees in newer cities around the world. And it's always, again, it's a time and money. It's always time and money. Everyone trying to do things fast. And I think one of the problems with, or had been one of the problems with modernism, is that so much was built after the Second World War and built so cheaply and so quickly. And I think people saw the idea of doing something in a kind of contemporary modern style as a way to save money, because they were thinking, oh, well, we don't have to add all this decoration, so we can do these buildings that turned out to be horrible to live in because they were just so cheaply put together. That's one thing I feel, that we are very fortunate that we live in an age where we can take a lot of those ideas that were just spectacular, that people really were so innovative in the first part, and middle part of the last century in terms of residential design. And then we can work those ideas in a way where they're actually viable. They don't leak, the houses don't get too hot or too cold, and you can really enjoy what they meant you to enjoy, from that style.
Absolutely right. And coming back full circle to the idea that there is, while people often use the terms house and home interchangeably, I think they are actually very different. In certain cases, they do overlap, but they can be mutually exclusive in many ways.
Yeah, very, very true. And that's what we're hopefully in the business of, creating homes. We're fortunate that we have right now a client, and we're now doing a house for their daughter, which is really exciting. So we've had the pleasure of the daughter growing up in a house we designed, and now we get to design a house for her family to come. And that's got to be one of the most satisfying things that I can really think about in our business, the idea that people are still committed.
Well, it certainly speaks to a relationship, because someone doesn't refer or have a child want to work with the same architect just because the house was pretty. It doesn't. It has to be far more granular and intimate than that, even if it's in the subconscious, I believe.
Well, thank you for saying that, but I hope so.
That's very much true. I'll tell you, it's funny, obviously not on the same scale as envisioning and designing somebody's home, but one of the great joys of my career in Urban Bonfire is when we have, someone that was one of our early adopters and had one of our first kitchens here locally, and will say, my son and my daughter-in-law, or my daughter and son-in-law just purchased a home, and I'd like to get them one of your kitchens as a gift because I know how it impacted how much I use it and enjoy it. And that is just the ultimate sort of, to me, that's the ultimate. It's the testimonial on steroids. It's just
absolutely
wonderful.
No, well, brilliant.
Wonderful. Paul, I've not only have I enjoyed meeting you face to face. First of all, I was very, very honored to be included in one of your projects. I don't take it lightly, and thank you for it. It was really quite an honor for us to be part of something that you've created at that level of scale. And your work I find incredibly inspiring, because even though it is by virtue of scale and size and cost far beyond the realm of anything I would ever envision as a home, it has nothing I've ever seen in your work, your site, your Instagram has ever remotely come off as inauthentic, ostentatious. Everything that I can see in every level of detail, there's thoughtfulness. And I think that you have really beautifully fused together meaningfulness even in large scale, and that is not an easy feat. I'm a huge fan.
No, thank you. I really appreciate it. That's just wonderful to hear that, and it's going to make my day hearing that.
Most kind. Well, I will hopefully, whether you're in Montreal first or I'm in LA first, as soon as we're able to travel, it would be my greatest pleasure to have a meal with you and break bread and continue our discussions.
It'll be nice, if we're open restaurants and we can travel, that would be great.
I look forward to that.
Thank you again, Ryan.
Thank you
for your time.
Thank you for the time. I wish you and your family continued health and wellness and safety, and I will speak to you very soon.
Thank you. Same to you. Take care. Bye now.
Thank you. Be well. Bye-bye. Thanks again.